Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to come here to Malaysia and present this session. I really appreciate that. And congratulations to QLab on achieving that TMMI level 5. Malaysia rocks. We might be coming to you for testing in the future. That's a fantastic achievement. And thank you also to Mistura and MSTV for inviting me. So, journalism and software testing is a topic that I'm trying to explain. It's one that I thought of one evening when I thought of how similar journalism and software testing really are in terms of their objectives and also in terms of some of the methods that we can use. Now, you don't have to write anything down. The slides will be up on the Softtech website in about a week, so you can study for the final exam and you should be fine. But don't bother writing it down. So I come from Canberra, Australia, which is the capital city of Australia, just across the oceans from here, and it's between Sydney and Melbourne. So basically what happened was I worked in media and journalism. I did a lot of commercial radio in Australia, did a lot of freelance writing, still do some of that. And I've also taught journalism courses in the tertiary education sector. And then I moved into IT and I moved into programming and software testing. And when I began in IT, and I don't know if it's the same for you, I thought it was all about the technology. I thought the big problems were technology problems. And if I learnt enough C# coding, I'd be fine. Did some COBOL to start with. That's how long it's been. And then as the years went on, I realised actually the problems are maybe much more along the human side than along the technology side. One of the things I liked about moving into testing was that I didn't have to fix the bugs anymore. I could just hand them back to the developers to fix. And that's one thing I think that's great about testing. Communication's at the heart of what we do. We've got the IT systems communicating with our end user. We're communicating with each other, hopefully. And so there's lots of overlap between the professions. So you might be wondering, what does it actually have to do with journalism? I went and had a look at the requirements for journalists. And they kind of came out like this. And this is, from the Journalism Association. And if you look at the skills, like a questioning, curious and inquisitive mind, does anyone in the room have one of those? Or maybe not after lunch so much anymore. But on a good day, I hope so. Communication skills, writing ability. We are writing more than ever before, thanks to the internet technologies and the mobile technologies that are around now. And I often get SMS texts from my 14-year-old daughter that I can't understand a word of anymore because it's, got all these letters and numbers and everything. Can you translate that for me? So the amount of writing has increased dramatically in all professions and also in daily life. The idea of news sense is really, what are the big issues, say, in your organisation at the moment, being aware of those and being aware of what threats there might be on the horizon. Obviously knowing about computers, being able to listen, having general knowledge and sort of being patient in trying to get things done. There's a sense of public responsibility, I think, that goes with our profession as well as with journalism, in that we are ultimately trying to protect the end user, sometimes protecting the organisation from things that could happen if systems didn't work the way they were meant to. Interviewing skills, language skills, ability to meet deadlines. I guess we've come across that once or twice before with weekend testing and trying to get the project in on time. Analysis skills, being resourceful, persistent, truthful. We try to tell the truth as much as possible. Accurate and having integrity. So there seems to be a fair bit of overlap between the professions. And if you think about what the professions are trying to achieve, journalism is supposed to be about the truth. We're not supposed to tell lies. Similarly with testing, we are meant to be independent from the systems we test. And I think the talks beforehand about if Malaysia became, a centre of, outsourced testing, that does certainly
provide a lot of independence, which I can see as a benefit. It's meant to be an independent monitor of power, journalism that is, and we should be allowed to exercise our personal conscience as long as it's safe to do that, depending on the environment that we're in. So pretty similar there. And it's also been called, I don't know if you guys have come across the term the fourth estate before. Has anyone heard of the fourth estate? The fourth estate is really from British Parliament, and it kind of worked like this. They had these different levels, and 4 levels basically. And what happened in British Parliament was the king you have at the top, of course, and then you have the House of Lords, which was like the noble people, the people with titles and the clergy. And then you have below them the House of Commons, they're like the elected members of Parliament. And the fourth estate was then the journalists, who were supposed to keep an eye on what was happening in Parliament to make sure it was all above board. Now, if we look at the structure of IT organisations or IT projects, we can actually map them back. The king might be the business area because they dictate what is required. They kind of wear the crown, responsible for funding. The House of Lords, they could be the project managers because they kind of direct what happens. Then who would the House of Commons be? We had a lot of debate at work about this, and we thought definitely the developers, and then we thought the journalists are kind of the testers because we keep an eye on the other components. It's often been asked whether testing is actually a job or more like a vocation. Job is something you just do day after day. Vocation is something that you're committed to. And vocations are things like, teaching, medicine, the clergy, journalism. And they've got certain aspects to them. And I don't know if you ever experience these aspects, like if you ever feel that you've sacrificed a lot for the role, or you feel maybe a bit burnt out, a bit tired, you feel like you've done hours that are too long. Sometimes it's not a very thankful job, and sometimes you have to fight for what you believe in. And so we can do a lot to help, and I feel as a professional we often try to go the extra mile, go more than we need to, unlike the person whose job is to paint the line on this road. Just took a bit of a shortcut there. As testers, we would never do that. And the reason is because our role has such a big impact on people every day. So we had Duchess Lee Wahid Omar before. He mentioned a few big IT disasters with big money involved. Just recently on the weekend, big international bank, HSBC customers, had a few problems accessing their banking services after the bank's computer systems failed. Short time before that, in Florida, the doors to a maximum security prison suddenly opened due to a security glitch, which is not good if you live near the jail. And Virgin down in Australia, embarrassingly, they had a major problem last month. Thousands of customers were stranded when the booking system went down. So certainly these faults can really hurt people, and this is where we have the power to make a difference. But what about just the little problems that slowly drive people crazy, like this guy here, and what happens to him? Now, is that good for the person's blood pressure? Is that going to make him come home from work smiling from ear to ear? Maybe not. So it can't be good. It can't be good. And I've had long arguments with testers about who we're really looking after, and I always feel it's those people at the end of the line that we are looking after. It's not our responsibility to make judgments often about what gets fixed and what doesn't, but it is our responsibility to communicate that information well enough that there's a good chance of it being fixed. And that's where I again see the connection to journalism, is that if we communicate it well enough, in theory, if we nag long enough and it's important enough, we might be able to make a difference. Sharing news of our successes is difficult because when we succeed, doesn't that mean someone else has failed? And we've often been tempted to share our success with stories like this. Test team finds 100th bug. Or performance bottleneck exposed. Or weekend implementation halted. Is that the sort of news they want to hear from us? Probably not. So we can't use such direct methods to make people aware of what we do. We have to use more cuddly stories, like this one here. New test lab opens. This was one that we wrote in my department, and we took a lovely photo of people sitting in the new test lab, and we wrote some very warm, cuddly words about it. So unfortunately, that's probably the way we do have to present our information. Bad news delivery. It's the most common thing that we have to do. No one likes to hear it. No one says thank you for telling me about it. No one. And if we can do a few things, like if we can avoid it being a surprise, that can sometimes help. And you can avoid it being a surprise if you're very connected with the organisation, and then that way you can actually sort of give a bit of forewarning to a few people so it doesn't come as a complete shock. And what we've found is bad news, it can often be delivered really well, say on a Friday afternoon or before a long weekend especially. So for example, the boss is about to leave on a Friday afternoon before a long weekend. We say, hey boss, yeah, we'll need another week to do that testing, is that okay? And as he's walking out the door, he'll say, yep, sounds fine. You know, and we'll have a witness, and we'll be able to get that extension. The funny thing about delivering bad news is some people actually don't hear the bad news. Now, there was a very famous, I don't know if you guys read Larson cartoons over here, but Gary Larson does a lot of really funny cartoons, sometimes with animals. And he did this famous cartoon called What You Say to Dogs and What Dogs Hear. Because we still talk to our dogs as though they understand what we say, don't we? I don't know why we do that. I talk to my 14-year-old daughter and she doesn't understand a word I say. But we try it with the dogs. And for example, in this cartoon here, there's a person talking to their dog. And the person's saying, okay, Ginger, I've had it. You stay out of the garbage. Understand, Ginger, stay out of the garbage. Or else. So that's what the person's saying. And all Ginger hears is blah, 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 Ginger, blah, 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 blah. And that cartoon inspired me so much that I actually changed it to a testing situation. And I called it What We Say to Project Managers. So what we say to project managers is, we've discovered another 6 Severity 1 bugs, and it's unlikely we'll meet our release date. And what they hear is blah, 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 will meet our release date. This is the way communication can become distorted. And that's part of the reason why we sometimes have to write the email so they have it in writing, have a witness, run a tape recorder, use any technique necessary to make sure they've got the message. Because everyone knows who gets blamed when faults go into production. In Australia, we've got these funny animals. You might have heard of some of them. And what we've done in our team is, sometimes when we've got difficult conversations, we actually rehearse that conversation with an animal puppet. Okay, because we find that helps us get into the right frame of mind. For example, we have an animal called the Tasmanian devil. And Tasmanian devil only lives in Tasmania. It's becoming extinct. It's got a thing called facial tumour disease. But that doesn't stop there from being puppets of the Tasmanian devil, and we have one. And he looks like that. So what we can do, you see, in our team meeting, we can have this little Tasmanian devil puppet. And he's quite aggressive. And so if we want to practice an aggressive response to a manager, so if the manager comes in, or he's going to come in, he's going to say, why wasn't the testing finished? Then the aggressive one that we can model with this is this one can say, what do you expect,
when we weren't given the resources that we needed.
So we can psych ourselves up for that interaction. But maybe that's too aggressive. Luckily, we have other animals in Australia that aren't quite as aggressive as that. We have the kangaroo. The kangaroo has a cheerful and easygoing nature. It just kind of hops around, eats a bit, hops around, gets hit by a car quite often, unfortunately. But the reason they get hit by cars so often is because they're just so relaxed and easygoing. They don't worry about the bright lights. They still stay in the middle of the road. And then you've got a huge insurance damage claim on your car. So when the kangaroo does it, we use our kangaroo puppet so that we can get into the zone. It's a beautiful little kangaroo puppet here. Hello! And so because the kangaroo is so relaxed, if we then practice that interaction with the animal, the kangaroo will just say, okay, we'll see what can be done. And he hops off, gets hit by a car. And it has a very sad ending. And then if we need to be even more relaxed, we've got this animal called a koala bear. And if you ever come to Australia, you have to come and see one. So koala bears, they eat eucalyptus leaves, which are these leaves here. That's what they feed on. And apparently they're like a drug, and it's sort of they're in a constantly drugged out state, about to fall out of the tree. But they're so relaxed. And it means that then if we're doing an interaction in the koala bear role, just this little fella here, I've just woken him up, we can then go, oh yeah, whatever. It's beautiful. In fact, I'll tell you what, this is such an amazing animal that my staff recently, they went one step further and they brought me this other koala bear here. This one here, we call him Blinky Bill. He's our team mascot. And what we use this one for is Blinky Bill is our expert on all decisions that need to be made that come from the next level up. So when a senior manager comes and says, we have to slash your testing staff, we say, let's just see what Blinky Bill thinks about that idea. We then switch on Blinky Bill and he makes his decision. We say, hey boss, I don't think Blinky thinks it's a good idea. So that gets the message through really nicely. And we also have, if Blinky's unavailable, there is one other animal that we have that gets the same message across, and that's of course our beautiful kookaburra. And if you haven't heard a kookaburra before, he kind of sounds like this. And he looks like that. And so then we go, why haven't you finished the testing? You must be joking. We weren't given the resources we needed. So we've got a range of animals there that we can use to communicate. And I'd recommend everyone should get a set of these. And I can sell them cheaply out the back. No, I'm only joking. But that's the way we can model communications and interactions and try and keep the personal aspects out of it as much as possible and still get our message through. Okay, so when we're reporting information, there's some things in journalism that are really important. And remember, I'll put these slides up for you so you can remember again what they are. But basically the 5 W's and the 1 H are really important. And they came from a famous book called Just So Stories by a guy called Rudyard Kipling. And he basically said, I keep 6 honest serving men. They taught me all I knew. The names are what, why, when, how, where, and who. So as long as those things are in your defect report or in any other communication, then you're fairly well covered. Now, I was running a session yesterday, the emotional intelligence testing section. I was asking people how many use Quality Centre to record defects and how many people use other sort of ad hoc methods. You know, I've seen emails used, I've seen spreadsheets used, seen Word documents used. It seems as though some people are still using the more manual methods. Now, when you're using those methods, it's especially important that you put this information in, because some of those methods don't necessarily have fields that define exactly what you need to record. But for people to take action, they need to know that information. And so basically, what it comes down to is these things here. When the slide just moves forward. So if you were raising some kind of defect, so you might have the who raised the defect, Fred Nerk. What did he raise? He discovered that the system crashes if negative quantities are added. When did it happen last night? Where did it happen in the test lab? Why did it happen? There might be inadequate input field checking. And how did it happen? It happened while he was running automated test scripts. So those things are definitely worth including in your report. Sorry, I'm trying to get this slide to move forward. And so effective writing is of course a key skill, because we write so much. And this is how you should do it. This is the recommended way to write. Always grab the reader by the throat in the first paragraph. Sink your thumbs into his windpipe in the second, and hold him against the wall until the last word. Now, can you write defect reports like that, do you reckon? Because although that one's probably a little bit extreme, a bit extreme for a defect report, the problem is people are overloaded with information, and the more engaging we can make our writing, the more chance we have that people will actually read it, and that they might even do something with it. Some advice from George Orwell, famous writer. Again, all this stuff will be online. Is always use a short word instead of a long word. If it's possible to leave out a word, leave it out. Don't use passive voice when you can use the active. So passive versus active. That's a rule that I don't agree with for test reports. I think you should always use the passive voice. So, for example, instead of saying Fred Nerk introduced a defect into the application, which would be active voice and blames Fred, we would say a defect was introduced into the application. No one is blamed. Is that nice or what? And we'll use short words. We're not going to write commence when we can write start. And instead of writing prior to, we'll write before, and so on. These are things that we practice as time goes on, but they are becoming increasingly important. The way we write our information, there's a thing from journalism called the inverted pyramid. The inverted pyramid goes back to the early days of journalism, when they used to use printing presses, and they used to actually have to fashion, the letters in steel and so on. And that was quite a labour-intensive job. So what used to happen was, if they ran out of space as they were fashioning these letters, they would just not put the last bit in. So that has given rise to having the most important stuff at the top and then working your way down. Because also people are so busy. Are they going to read more than the first line? They're tired, they've been working all day, they want to get home, they get some sort of message from you. Maybe they will just read the first line. So as long as they get the information they need in the first line, then that's probably going to be okay. So the way we'd lay out our communication is, in the first bit, we'd summarise the situation, covering the most important bits, then we'd provide more details, and then, at the end, we need some sort of thing to make them do something, like some sort of call to action. So call to action, very important. And so the way it might look is like this. You might have, at the very top of your writing, you'd say, on the registration screen, February 29 is being accepted for all years, not just leap years. So that's covered the where and the what. More info is the problem may be due to a new external date routine which was implemented on the screen. The other screens work fine. And then the call to action might be, this could damage customer relations and create adverse publicity for the organisation and needs urgent attention. So we've got that communication through as crisply as we possibly can. Other aspects of writing, we need a strong headline, summary of your defect report. The headline could be the subject line of an email message, might be thought of as a headline. And also think about the angle. Angle is really important in journalism, so out of all the components of the story, which aspect of it will get you the most immediate reaction? Depends on what you're trying to achieve. Most important point first, secondary information later, write in plain English as much as you can. I presume in most cases you are writing in English, but even if you aren't, the same principles apply, that we want to keep it simple. We have long and short sentences. We have paragraphs of about 3 sentences maximum, and that usually works quite well. Make sure you check your spelling and grammar. And reading level. Do you guys generally write in English, would you say, or not really? Like would we say 80% of the stuff would be English, or 70, 60, 50? Can I get a show of hands of who writes in English? Oh, okay, so quite a few people. Excellent. So I'll continue with the English version of this presentation. I won't switch to the Malay version. Because some of these tools, I'm not sure if they run in other languages, but one thing that we found that in some of our defect reports, they were becoming so confusing and so complicated that we're really having trouble getting the message through. So we went and we used this feature within Word called the Flesch-Kincaid Index, which is built into Word, but almost nobody ever uses. Has anybody in this room ever used the Flesch-Kincaid Index? A few. Excellent. I'd encourage everyone to go and have a look at this. So in Word 2010, under the File tab, Options, Proofing, if you go, so the File tab, the leftmost tab in Word 2010, and then you select Options and Proofing, you get this little box coming up. And that box, see how there's a show readability statistics thing that you can tick? We always tick that, and we always get some figures, some numbers out after we write things to try and see what it's like. And what this basically shows you is the level of education that you would need to understand the communication. Okay? So it comes up with a whole bunch of. Sorry, these are some further settings that you can set in that readability box. So you can actually customise it quite a lot. But what we basically did was, there's a famous book called Green Eggs and Ham by Dr. Seuss, famous kids book. And we ran that through the readability checker, and it gives you a grade level, the number of years of education that you need to read the report. It's recommended that you go probably, around about a grade 8 reading level or whatever, match what the newspapers do. So about 8 years of school to read it, and you're doing fairly well. The Green Eggs and Ham had a grade level of minus 1.3. So if you have minus 1.3 years of education, you can read Green Eggs and Ham. And it's not surprising, because it goes like this. Do you like green eggs and ham? I do not like them, Sam, I am. I do not like green eggs and ham. So very short syllables, very short sentences. Don't write your test reports like that. They won't be taken seriously. That shows how the index can sometimes, be a bit strange, because I'm not sure how you can go to negative grade levels. But by comparison, I looked at an article in Britannica about nuclear physics. Had a grade level of 15.5 years of education, which is pretty extreme. And we actually tried putting together a document that had Green Eggs and Ham and the nuclear physics story to see how that would come out. And that dropped our grade level on nuclear physics down to 2.4, which means that if you have a very complicated document and you put the text of Green Eggs and Ham in, you can make it readable for everybody. Good idea? Maybe not. But what it does show is that this thing has quite a lot of variation. But it certainly is worth looking at, just so that you've got some awareness of the level at which you're writing. There are other ways of presenting information. Maybe writing is not the best way. Maybe you could do something really amazing like this when you're presenting your testing information. Has anyone seen one of these before? It's called a word cloud. And you just hop onto this website called Wordle, and there's many of them that do it, and it's basically showing you, this is the 7 principles of testing. This has been run through on the document, and it summarised some of the key terms, and the more important terms in big letters like testing and defects, and less important terms in small letters. So you might want to, maybe at the beginning of a long and boring document, do that. We did that with people's resumes a while back. We had many resumes for jobs, ran them through this, got a bit of a feeling for the sort of things they were talking about in the resume, and that helped us make a decision. We did read the actual resumes as well, of course. Another interesting aspect is just using, say, for example, graphs. So using graphs is really good because you know that you can't lie using graphs. So if we present information with graphs, people are going to trust us. And that's important. So just say, for example, we've got a situation here where our overtime hours are doubling every single month. So in January, we got 200, in February we got 400, in March we got 800, in April we got 1600. So there's quite a severe line really going through the overtime dates, right? So there's a chance that if I pass it up to management, it's going to cause some level of concern because they might think that's a bit extreme. But if I change my scale to a logarithmic scale, which I can do in Excel, well, that's a lot more gentle, isn't it? That's not too bad, boss. You know, nothing's happening that's really worrying. So you can do some interesting things with graphs, and other interesting things that you can do is you can even use the wrong kind of graph. So maybe if I use a pie chart which has got no relevance at all, I can just pass that up the line. I get rid of the numbers, of course, because the numbers might cause some concern, and that would look fantastic. You know, I'd say, here's a little chart, everything's fine. Or what I could do is I could create an entirely meaningless chart, which makes no sense at all, but it looks scientific. Here's a chart, boss. Everything's good. I'm not suggesting you should ever do any of these things, and certainly I've never ever done any of this. I'm just making the point that the way information is presented can have, you know, certain advantages in certain situations, depending on the context and how safe it is to do that. Another way that we presented information is just with video clips. So we had to convince the organisation to do more automation testing quite a few years back. And no one really knew what automation testing was, and no one was interested in our boring presentations on what it was. So we thought if we created some sort of rap song or something, maybe that would help. So we got the test team together, got a cheap video camera, and we created this little video clip to try and encourage them to invest in the tools. And they really liked it. They were dancing around to it.
We're really up against it because the project's out of time. We've just got a new release, not to test would be a crime. It's only been a one-line change to perfect the thing. You won't need to regression test, we hear the people sing. But test we must, and test we will. Crikey, we're no fools. And we can do this quickly with automation testing tools. The scripts are written, the scripts are run, and soon allay our fears. By doing in 5 nanoseconds what would take 5 person years. When the system hits production, it gets critical acclaim. Because testing saves the users a world of grief and pain. So we hope that you've enjoyed our little automation rap. We can stop your project turning into a heap of insurmountable problems. So that certainly raised awareness, and that was good. 10 years later, the bosses are saying, we like that video you did 10 years ago, but who's maintaining the automation scripts? And oops, forgot about that aspect. But this certainly got us started, and we're dealing with the other problems as we go. Now, our voice is really, really important in getting the message through for anything. Okay, and there's certain things we can control. We can control the pitch, the pace, the pause, and the projection. And so pitch, obviously, we raise the pitch to convey a sense of urgency. Also need more time for testing. Maybe not quite as high as that, but you get what I mean.
then the pace, we can actually, obviously, if we speak faster, you know, come on, we've got to make a decision, we've got to get this thing on the way, we've got to get the people on board, we've got to start doing the resumes. So that can kind of work if you don't sound like a rambling idiot. Pause is really important. Pause adds emphasis. So then we can say things like, the system will, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, fail. You know, and in a meeting that can really work. And then projection is kind of how loud we talk. So in a meeting we might be like this a bit, and then suddenly we want to make a point note and we start talking like this. Are you understanding my message? In fact, I had so much trouble getting attention in meetings, even trying those techniques, that I actually bought a device to help me do it. Only cost $2. And it was this little baby here. So I reckon the train whistle should be taken to every meeting by software testing staff. If they start blabbing and blabbing and blabbing and they don't listen, give them a blast of this. That really wakes them up. Makes your ears ring for about a week afterwards, but if you're desperate, you'll do it. So I recommend to people to think about voice, maybe even record yourself on a little recorder. That can be quite painful to listen back to at first, because you think, I can't sound like that. But it can really help, because people notice voice. And maybe more so than reading, because they are swamped so much with information. So I've talked a bit about getting information out to people, but how do we obtain the information to begin with? So we can use the techniques of investigative journalism to actually get information and infiltrate. And what I once did is I infiltrated a development team for a long time, and all I had to do was change my regular glasses to these special developer glasses. As I wore my developer glasses, I was able to sit among the team looking like a developer and no one noticed for months. It was fantastic. Just couldn't see out of it, that's all. So these are some of the techniques that we can use from investigative journalism. We find ourselves some sources. You know, we call them sources. We speak to as many as we can. We try to verify the information they tell us through other sources, because maybe they're lying, maybe they have a political agenda. So we've always got to do a little background research like you're meant to do in journalism. We don't believe everything that we hear at face value. And so infiltration, one of the techniques that I just talked about. Then other ones are impersonation, where we impersonate someone else. I've sometimes had to do that on the telephone, you know, just being someone else. Maybe, you know, like if I'm not getting any action, I could ring up as a senior manager that doesn't exist, and I'd say, "Oh, hello, it's John Brown here. I look after IT infrastructure. Just wondering when that fix is going to go through." And as long as I can't tell my number appearing on the phone, maybe I can get away with it. Secret filming or recording, always good. I don't know what the laws are about secret recording in Malaysia, but in Canberra, where I come from, we have a very funny law in relation to recording conversations. And it goes like this. It goes, as long as you are in the conversation and at least one person in that conversation agrees to the recording, you're allowed to do it. Well, I agreed to it. I've got the recorder and I'm recording it. So I'm sure the law doesn't work that way in all places, so you be careful. It would be a courteous thing to actually let people know that you are recording. But we find we lose a lot of information if people don't take good minutes and there's no recording and there's no record kept. So certainly that can be useful. So in terms of developing sources, you stick your tentacles out, you try to get out into the organisation and you try to find as many contacts as you can. So I've got the octopus picture to illustrate that. Also, getting involved in activities in the organisation is really useful. And so I can't sing at all, but I joined the choir. I found joining the choir gave me a lot of insight into the perceptions of IT that people had, which I was then able to use for benefit. You know, sporting teams, attending presentations, and some other good methods of getting out there, similar to methods that would be used in journalism. So the sources can increase our understanding of what's actually happening and can give us the early warning signs. If they don't want to be quoted, you have to certainly respect that. That's really important. People who are useful as sources are people who have been good in the past, have been trustworthy in the past, who are reliable, who can actually explain what's going on in simple terms, and they're people that we need to nurture. If they tell you stuff that's off the record, don't reveal where you found out from, but you can get the information elsewhere. Another technique that's useful is, if you look at an organisational structure, you'll often see a structured chart that looks quite formal. You have people reporting to other people. So, for example, in this organisation, we have a lady called Sheila at the top who's in charge, and then she has a few staff, and so on. But the power in an organisation doesn't normally work like the structure chart says, and that's because it's based on relationships that people have with each other. So you can actually add information to your structure chart about relationships that make it clearer how things actually really work by annotating the formal structure chart with little comments like this. So we now know that Bluey is a cousin of Sheila, Nicole plays rugby with Hugo, Tez disagrees with Sydney, this one got promoted over that one, such and such teaches the trombone to the son of that one. So then, if I'm offending someone or talking about someone, I've got to be careful because maybe that's the one that has a very strong relationship with another one. So certainly that awareness, organisational awareness, is really, really useful. One problem we've had in getting some of our bugs fixed is people don't believe us. So we recently had a system where some changes were made, and we said the users are going to struggle with this, and your developers sometimes say, no, they'll be fine. They'll be right, they'll figure it out. So getting video evidence is a technique we found really useful. And I don't know whether you guys have done usability testing before, but usability testing I think is essential, and it can be done really easily, and it's quite cheap to do because you can run some software on your laptop that actually captures what's going on, captures the video, captures the person, and you can then replay that to your developers. You use the techniques of journalism in usability testing. You're asking open-ended questions. You're asking things like, what is happening? What are you going to do next? Why are you going to do this? And you ask the person doing the usability test to say what they're thinking. You never criticise them. They're not being tested. The system's being tested. And I got a very quick video clip of one of these tests that we did, which turned up something really, really interesting. Because what happened was one of our systems was completely rewritten, and it was supposed to make it easier for the user. So what happened was, certain fields were moved around on the screen, certain features were removed, and it was all supposed to go well, but it had a few problems, as this video is going to show you. So you'll be able to see the actual screen and the user.
I would now be looking for a save button, because as far as I'm concerned, that's no go, and I don't want to claim that yet.
So just to explain what's happening there, this is a ministerial correspondence system. And it used to have a save button in the old version. In the new version, it auto-saves, so you never have to press the save button. The other changes they made was they made changes to some of the screen layouts about, where the statuses appear. And so this is where the user then starts...
So how can you tell what's happening to it? How can you tell what state it's in right now?
To me, that looks, because it's saying claim, so from the system we're currently using, to me, that would mean that it's now gone to Anna.
Anything else on the screen that would tell you whether it has gone?
Yes, the current working officer at the top here says Anna.
And anything else apart from that? In terms of telling you what just happened?
Oh yes, okay, assigned to action officer by coordinator.
So that didn't jump out?
That didn't have to jump out at me, no. That one didn't have to say.
And so what would you do next?
And now I would be looking for a save button to make sure that when I close out of maps, it doesn't come back to me. So I need something so... There is actually no continue. There's actually no save button I can see. But because it says up here action, I would then probably go close. Okay, are you sure you want to close? Okay. To me now, I'll be wondering whether I should actually do that because I haven't saved it. And from the system where...
So it's maybe a bit more uncertain because you have that message.
So are you sure you want to close this form? Am I looking at a save button that I'm just... being blind to? Maybe we don't need to save it. Continue. Okay. No, it's definitely signed by myself to Anna. Okay. I don't know now. I will have to say I wouldn't be sure what to do.
So that was the evidence we went back to the team with. A user with 10 years experience in the business aspect of this who doesn't know what to do and would have to make a help desk call. Cheap to do, very powerful, very convincing. The developers were then arguing about the cost of actually fixing that little issue, and I had a very simple solution for them, which was annoyingly was rejected. This was a very low-cost option. Remember, the save button has been taken away. The system auto-saves. Why don't we just put a fake save button onto the screen, which the user can click, and then they'll be absolutely fine. Fake save button costs me almost nothing to implement. Problem solved. They don't like these innovative solutions. I have no idea why. So it never happened. But at least they got to see what it was like. Now, if you turn up to a project meeting like this, you might stress out a few of the people. So the problem is that the problem with getting stuff on audio or videos, that makes people self-conscious and they can't talk honestly anymore. I'd still recommend that we let them know. I think it's a bit sneaky having it under the table. And certainly, if you did record, you would never actually use that recording against them in any way. Every device can record these days too. That's the other funny thing, isn't it? Is that you could switch on your mobile phone and start recording. No one would know. Our testing responsibility is interesting. You know when we're asked to test things, sometimes we think, well, I've been asked to test this certain aspect, so I'll just limit my testing to that. And we had that occurring just recently at work. And what we had a client registration screen. So it was a very simple screen. So you just put the person's name, family name and given name in, and their date of birth. Okay. Now, there's a problem with what's been entered here. If you look at the date of birth, that 01/01/2015, that's kind of a bit in the future, isn't it? So as a tester, you'd say, accepting that date of birth is maybe not a real good idea, right? So let's just see what happens. We give it a little test, and then we see, oh, that's okay, because the clever programmer has got an error message that comes up. So we can now tick off that test as having been passed. Or can we? Because we then start to read the error message and we're saying, what the heck? All I did was put in a wrong date of birth and I've got a window that's popped up and it's full of this gobbledygook stuff, and then we go and analyse what it actually says. And it says absolutely frightening things in the message. It says, wrong field values or value types detected in date of birth. That's message 1. Never use the word wrong when you're putting out an error message. It's not the user's fault. We don't use wrong. And then it talks about field values or value types. Yeah, an IT person might talk about those. I'm just entering a date of birth. What are you pestering me with that for? Detected. Oh, like I've done something wrong and I've been caught out. Bad words. This lovely code here. Please re-enter your field values. If you need additional assistance, please refer to the documentation SPL UIF 00211. This is the system that actually went out into production with that message. I'm serious. I was just horrified as a tester. I actually rang the help desk and I said, could you please give me SPL UIF 00299? And they actually hung up on me like I was an idiot. No one knew what that was. But the good thing is that after message 1, then they do a message 2, and that's supposed to help. So we now have an even more techo thing here that actually provides no value. So they talk about date of birth, and they've suddenly got it in single quotation marks, where it wasn't before. And they then use mathematical symbols that they're using what a less than or equals is, so I don't have to think back to my maths what that actually means. And let's just chuck in a function call, because the user can figure out that today with brackets means a function call, because that's really natural. And we use you use a comparison operator, have to have an AND, because they've probably done their Boolean logic degree, so they'll be fine with that. and another little operator there, and date of death in square brackets, that must be a field. And then the third summary of it, is birth date with one quote missing on that, then that comparison thing again, and a different code, SA2013-KN-7 this time. Now, I don't know if I just whinge too much or if I'm just too pedantic, but I thought that was the most stupid error message I've ever read. In fact, I thought it was so stupid I put it up on my wall as an example of what never to write. Why couldn't they have written something as basic as this? Date of birth may not be in the future, please re-enter. Now, as a tester, I didn't have to do any of that. I could have just said, fine, it's passed the test. What I'm suggesting is that from a communications point of view, because it's so important, when you come across stuff like that incidentally, please raise a defect or something, because it's outrageous. You'll notice that some other systems have gone for the really warm and cuddly error messages, and one of the big ones doing this right now, I think, is Mozilla. And they have, Mozilla Firefox, you might have seen things like this, where it says, well, this is embarrassing. It's embarrassing. So suddenly it's not the user's fault anymore, it's the computer's fault because the computer's embarrassed. There had been a proposal on that last system I showed you that we start writing all the messages like that. The problem with that is they weren't going to do them all, they were going to start doing some of them. So what would happen is at certain times you get a warm and cuddly message about it being embarrassing, and at other times you get a really nasty message full of gobbledygook, and you'd be thinking, geez, that computer's in a bad mood today. So if you're going to change the error messages, change them all or don't change any of them, because it's going to freak your users out if you just do some. In general, for error messages, the sort of things that we should do is we should answer those questions again. The 5 W's and the 1 H. Describe the problem, the cause, the solution, like tell them how to fix it. There's nothing more annoying than error messages where they've just got an OK button when it's not OK. Like system is about to shut down OK, thinking, not OK, but it's not there. So your error messages should be written in plain language, be relevant, actionable, so they can do something user-centred, short, clear, specific, courteous, and rare. A technique you can use to try and encourage people to fix things is the fake newspaper story. The fake newspaper stories work for me. So, say for example I couldn't get much support with this particular problem, I can then write a fake article. The testing star, confusing error message causes chaos. Help desk phones were inundated as users struggled with a cryptic error message that would require a computer science degree to understand. The message included comparison operators, Boolean logic, function calls, field names, and variables, and was described by the user as complete nonsense. So I can say, boss, what about if they wrote this? Don't you reckon we should maybe fix it? So sometimes that can help as a technique. It's really important when we write, because we're testers and we're always perfect, that we check the accuracy of everything. And that's when he laughs. He's laughing at me. I'm being serious about this. We have to check accuracy because we don't want to give people reason to complain. And one amazing feature that's included in Outlook 2010, Word 2010, Excel 2010 is that it can actually read out your documents. Has anyone ever used the speak feature in those systems? Because it's one of the most hidden features there is and one of the most useful ones. So late at night, when you're reading emails that you're writing and you're tired and you can't think anymore, you can actually switch this thing on. I've got a 30-second video that just shows you how to do that because it's a bit tricky, and this will also be available online, but I would suggest everyone does this. And this is how, sorry, let me just go back one. And of course this little video, for some reason, oh, hang on, this is what we do.
Click the downward pointing arrow to the right of the quick access toolbar. Click more commands. Change popular commands to all commands so you can see speak appearing in the list below. First, click the drop-down arrow. Now click All Commands. Scroll down the list, which is alphabetical, until you find Speak. Click on Speak. And now click the Add button to add the Speak icon to the Quick Access toolbar. And click OK. The Speak icon has been added to the Quick Access toolbar. You can now select any text in your document by pointing and dragging, or even the entire text by pressing Ctrl+A as we will do now. When you click the Speak icon, the selected text will be read.
Testing principles. A number of testing principles have been suggested over the past 40 years and offer general guidelines common for all testing.
That's probably a bit fast, but the basic idea is that we're adding another icon to the Quick Access toolbar at the top. We can then click that and we can have stuff read out. And very often I find I can't see errors anymore because I'm getting tired, but I can hear them. I can easily hear them if I've got a double word or a missed word or something. So I'd really recommend looking up that Speak feature and using it if you can to actually make sure you haven't got mistakes in your Word documents or in your emails. And also when you're tired, it's nice to have the emails read out to you, incoming emails. You're just getting too tired to read, your eyes are getting sore. It's a feature. It's a feature that's not used much. Through questions, we can actually get a lot of information that can help us. So through questions, we can actually give people messages, like hidden messages. So asking a question seems quite innocent, doesn't it, in many cases, but I can have a hidden embedded message. And that's one of the tricks that we can use. And a good journalist always knows the answer to the question before he or she asks the question. We're just trying to get them to say something that we can quote later on or record. And we can convey these embedded messages. And so we do our research, we know what the likely responses are, we know what question we're going to ask next, so we're fine, we're making our person comfortable. And in that setting, we can get the best information out of them. We ask open questions, things like, how did you feel when this happened? And closed questions that require like a yes or no answer, like has the system been implemented, yes, no, and so on. We don't want to make it feel as though they're being cross-examined by the police or the CSI squad. We want to just be curious, relaxed. We want to smile and nod and let them be silent, stay neutral. These are all techniques from journalism that work quite well in testing as well. Recording answers is good if you can ask to record. Anything that comes up after you talk to them is really useful. And if you need to use a thing called leading questions, that can help. So in other words, if you want to get across the fact that an error message is going to upset the user, you can, instead of asking about that, you can say, when the error message upsets the user, who should they call? So I've embedded my message in a question, an unrelated question, but I'm still trying to get my message through to them without being so direct. The way that you talk or present information can have a big impact on how well it works. So sometimes you're going to do face-to-face. Often you're going to do email. Has anyone here ever, you've got someone at the next desk or a few desks away, has anyone ever written an email instead of standing up and actually going to the other person? Because we find that happens quite a lot. Now, in some cases that's fine because we need a documentary record of the conversation, but in other cases we're just getting so used to typing that we're talking less, and that's maybe not the best thing. Phone calls are good. You can use a post-it note, an SMS. You can use social media. We use a lot of symbolism to get messages across. And one of the ones that we use, if a developer's code keeps bouncing all the time, so, we test it, it's got a bug, we send it back. Test it again, it's got another bug, we send it back. We're actually going through this cycle time after time, and it looks like it's not getting into production in a hurry. The way we communicate is with a symbol, and we basically give them this great Australian symbol, the boomerang. We give them the boomerang award because the boomerang always comes back again, and we say this is what's going to happen to your code if you don't start fixing some of the errors. So you can use symbolism instead of using any of those other methods. It just depends on what communication method works best for you and the other person. How are we going to communicate with them? That makes a big difference. Are we going to talk to them privately, or are we going to talk to them in an open area? If you're doing Agile, it might be during the daily stand-up, might be in a team meeting or a project meeting or some executive meeting. So the context is important, but certainly we don't want to spring surprises on them. We want to make sure that they're fully aware of what's going to happen. The kind of questions we ask sometimes depend on the person that we're talking to. So if we're trying to push certain buttons, for the project manager, we might ask about things related to meeting deadlines. For the business analyst, we might be talking about requirements, or for the developer about coding errors. So we choose our questions based on which kind of person we have that we're talking to. So for example, project manager, you might say something like, how much overtime are we able to accommodate under the current budget? And the embedded message is, there's no way we can finish on time with the resources that we have, is an example of an embedded message in a question. Business analyst might be, you're saying, I'm just wondering what happens on the registration screen if the user has registered more than once. Embedded message, there's problems with the requirements. For a developer, we might say, what happens if the user puts in the year with just the last 2 digits instead of 4 digits? Embedded message, there's a bug in the way the date routine works. So there's ways of getting these messages through by questions. We've often wondered about when developers and testers are close together. And with Agile, we're seeing that more and more where I come from. And there's a thing called embedded journalism that really happened with the 2003 invasion of Iraq, the first Gulf War. What happened was they sent the journalists along with the army units. They were embedded with the army units, so they were with them. And what that meant was that for their protection, they had to be a bit careful about the relationship with the army units because, they're walking along areas where there might be improvised explosive devices, landmines, all sorts of stuff. If the army's not protecting them, it could get kind of risky. And so they were quite limited in what they could report, and it kind of had to be fairly positive. And the question is, if the testers are too embedded with the developers or with the project team, is there a risk of that happening? And in one of the talks before, we heard about Secret was using a great term, the brainwash centre, she called it, when she had the developers and the testers together many years ago, the brainwash centre. And that's something that we certainly need to avoid. And that's where independent testing, I think, has a lot to offer. And we certainly always, for our major projects, run independent test teams. And part of the reason is that we don't have the relationship pressures. We can be ourselves. We used to have a little celebration when we used to find a bug when we were in our independent team. And so what we used to do is we used to just do this. We'd put on a nice coloured little things here. Then we'd have the sound tubes in the team. And if someone found a really good bug, they'd just grab this stuff. That made us really happy. What we found was when we were with the developers, it really annoyed them. So we couldn't do our sound tubes anymore. We had to get rid of our sound tubes, get rid of our coloured things here. And it was really quite distressing. So that was one of the limitations that we had. We couldn't celebrate our successes. We didn't have that atmosphere of, we're testers. We're here to test, we're independent, we're knowledgeable, we're powerful, we're useful. And the other problem we had was always this informal fixes thing where, the developer would say, oh, don't bother logging that, I'll just quickly fix it while we're talking. And then we wouldn't get a proper reading on our defects. This is no joke. This is secret information. There's a certain agency that recently decided that its bug count was always going to be 0. They were going to go for a 0 defects policy. And the way they've achieved that is by, instead of logging the actual defects in Quality Centre, there are no defects logged in Quality Centre anymore. They will now be emailed to a special defect analyst who will decide whether they're worthy of being put into Quality Centre. The special defect analyst isn't actually a tester. So we've got some serious concerns about, yeah, it might look like zero defects, but is it really? And again, that's where that independence thing, I think, can pose a real risk. The other good thing about the independence is that you can do fun things. So when we had our independent testing, we used to do colourful things and have competitions and so on, birthday celebrations. We used to actually have the principles of testing, the list of testing principles actually up on a wall. And by having it up on a wall, it meant that we can point to different issues like, for example, exhaustive testing is impossible is number 2, so if a bug slipped through, we'd point to number 2. Exhaustive testing is impossible, and that allowed us to promote testing because we had our own space, which was a big advantage. Do you have to be courageous to be a tester? Is it like being a journalist in a war zone? Maybe sometimes it is. And I've got some photos that illustrate this. So this, for example, is a typical project manager after reading your email on his iPhone about some problems. This is when he comes and talks to you about the message on the iPhone. And this is how you feel after he's talked to you about the message on the iPhone. So you have to have courage in our profession, and I think that's really important. We also have to keep promoting ourselves. We have to let people know how good we are. And so we had a design competition in my team to try and design some sort of logo. And the logo we did was this one here. The bug stops here, software testing section. And basically I had my daughter draw the bug, and then I went out and I got some t-shirts done up. So this here was the t-shirt that we had with the logo on it. And then on the back I had software testing section. And so I ordered a whole bunch of these because I was going to have like an army of software testers that were going to walk around with these black shirts and black jeans and black boots and very gently encourage proper unit testing. So then what happened was I went and put it up on my office door as well because I was so proud of it, for everyone to see and to know how committed we were to testing. And that just calm this guy down. Behave yourself. So we had the bug stops here, and my little name tag, and then one day a really, really bad bug got through the system and it went into production. And I didn't know what to do with all the t-shirts because, I've gone and printed all these things off at huge cost and I can't really get rid of that message now. My daughter will be devastated if I don't use her little drawing. So I found that by adding to it, by adding an asterisk and by adding a little message, I was able to actually get around this problem. So I had a bit of a message at the bottom, the asterisk, and the message said, "This is our sincere goal, but does not mean that all bugs will necessarily stop here." So we had to go for a bit of a disclaimer. And I was so stressed by that I designed a test report disclaimer that we put at the bottom of our test reports. We would put it like in a 5-point font, at the very bottom, and every test report would say this. And that's the way we kind of avoided the situation of people expecting us to always catch them. We'd say, within the time and resources available for testing, we believe the system is ready for production deployment. However, it should be noted that since exhaustive testing is impossible, and since testing can only demonstrate the presence of defects, not their absence, the system cannot be considered to be defect-free. So a little disclaimer at the bottom, it just summarises what could happen. Another thing we did was we showed them what would happen if they didn't have testers. And again, we illustrated that with a little video clip that we created. This is someone making a healthcare claim, which is normally a small amount of money, but they end up getting a large amount because of a bug in the system.
Hello, how are you today?
I'm
very well. My hip's stuffed. I can hardly walk.
Oh, that's no good.
Yes, it's bad.
Okay. Have you got your Medicare card and your claim there today?
I certainly have.
Thank you very much. Now, I just need you to sign there for your money, thank you. Now there's your money, I'll just put it together for you. There you go.
Are you sure that that's the correct amount?
Well, that's not actually the full amount, that's all the cash I have in the branch, but the rest of the benefit will be coming in a cheque in the post in about 2 weeks.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, are you sure?
Yes, that's definitely the correct amount, as the system is telling me that is the correct benefit you're getting back today. Here's your card. Have a wonderful day.
I will now. Thank you.
It's okay. Bye-bye.
So we had some of our staff that volunteered to do that for us one afternoon, and it certainly helped to get the message through. Very strangely, only about a year ago, that situation actually ended up occurring. And someone got this massive overpayment. It was all over the media. And we felt like saying, we could have warned you about this. So these things do happen sometimes. Luckily it was caught. So just in looking at what we've talked about in this session, and thank you very much for your attention after a difficult session after lunch to try and stay awake. Communication is our key skill, I think, and people are being swamped with information. So we can use some of these methods of journalism to try and develop some sources of information so we know what's going on, do our research, get our message through. Have to be careful, of course, with the information that we get from sources in case it's not reliable. Other things that we have to try and pay attention to in the communication space is that we always have to think about our target audiences when we communicate. So a good communicator is always thinking about who they're sending the message to and what response they want. We choose the appropriate communication medium or method, whether it's email or a boomerang or walking up or fake newspaper article or whatever, and using some kind of novelty, something different, like a video clip, can sometimes really work. And I feel that as you guys go on in the testing space, you might find that you come up with some of the similar struggles that we've been facing, and you might want to use some of these solutions to address them. But thank you very, very much for coming along, and all the best with Malaysian testing. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Thomas.